Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for joining the third of a four-part webinar series addressing digital transformation and the data economy in the age of COVID. Our third topic is Accelerate, getting to your North Star faster. My name is Chad Rakowski. I am a co-leader of Baker Hostetler's new digital transformation and data economy team and a partner in the Philadelphia office. I assist clients in the midst of the digital transformation, helping them identify and capture the intellectual property in their valuable data, algorithms, and enterprise software. Clients rely on me to help identify their IP, to build internal processes for its management, navigate open source and other open innovation strategies, and to create licensing programs that enable full value realization. I also help clients to protect that value in disputes and litigation, whether through enforcing the client's IP rights or fending off attacks by competitors. The other co-leaders of the team are Jawan Serrato, a partner in the San Francisco office, and Janine Anthony Bowen, a partner in our Atlanta office. We are a multidisciplinary team focused on helping clients determine where their opportunities and vulnerabilities lie and to design a plan to manage, protect, and leverage digital and data assets. So far in our webinar series, we've introduced the concept of digital transformation and had top recruiters identify hiring trends that might augur what the post-COVID economy will look like. In our second installment, we looked at ways that companies can leverage the data economy to pivot their business model to address new challenges or realize new efficiencies. Today, we're going to look at some features common to companies that are thriving even in the COVID era. So let me introduce to you today's panelists. Dr. Lawrence Wu will speak to us today and give his perspective from 2 points of view. First, he is the president of NERA Economic Consulting, a global firm of consulting economists who specialize in providing expert economic testimony in the areas of antitrust, intellectual property, securities and finance, regulatory economics, and tax. They are managing through the crisis like many companies. Second, he is an economist who is specialized in the economics of antitrust and IP. Many people know him for his expertise in healthcare markets, and his recent work in the area includes testimony for CVS in connection with its acquisition of Aetna last year. Some of the mergers he has worked on include Express Scripts' acquisition of Medco, which involves pharmacy benefit management services, and Zillow's acquisition of Trulia, which involves online real estate platforms. Ann O'Brien focuses her practice on advising and counseling businesses facing civil antitrust, criminal cartel, or complex white-collar investigations or litigation, and is a partner with Baker Hostetler in her Washington, D.C. office. Her insight on antitrust agency priorities, goals, and policies are a valuable asset to companies facing international and multi-agency exposure. She has substantial experience leading every aspect of domestic and international antitrust and white-collar investigations and prosecutions, including litigating federal criminal jury trials. Additionally, Ann provides clients with cutting-edge compliance counseling and training that can help deter or quickly detect antitrust exposure, informed by what is most important by the antitrust division and the courts. Also with us is Aaron Rabinowitz. He's a partner in our Baker Hostetler's Philadelphia office, where he counsels clients on crafting cost-efficient IP portfolios that best meet their needs, whether those needs are protecting the client's own products, monetizing IP through licensing, or enforcing that IP against competitors in courts and in alternative dispute forums. His representations involve a wide variety of technologies, including orthopedic devices, medical diagnostic systems, conventional and alternative energy technologies, biotech, aerospace components, industrial chemicals, material science, nanotech, and electronic devices. Our program today will last 1 hour and is approved for 1 hour of CLE credit in California, New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Colorado and New Jersey credit are available via reciprocity. Credit is pending in Georgia, Ohio, and Washington State. For all other states, attorneys will receive a certificate of attendance and electronic materials so they can file directly with their CLE credentialing entities. During the course of the webinar, you will see 2 slides that will contain 2 different CLE codes. You will need to make note of those 2 codes and enter them into a brief CLE questionnaire immediately following the program's conclusion. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type your questions in the bar on the right side of your screen in the questions area. We will try our best to answer them at the end of the program. If not, we will follow up with you after the webinar to answer those questions. We have included our email addresses on this slide, so please feel free to contact us at any time with comments, suggestions, concerns, or questions. We will also send an email to everyone in the next day or 2 with a link to a video recording of this webinar and a PDF of the presentation. So today we're going to look at some companies that have risen to meet the COVID moment and look at some common characteristics that they share that might help explain their success. We'll look at how they secured their IP in the technologies that they adopted in a right-sized fashion, leveraged their data in responsible ways, and adopted technologies that make them nimble and able to adapt quickly. These are companies that not only took their IP seriously, but had a clarity of vision and a discipline of process that enabled clear IP ownership. We'll look at how these sophisticated companies are sharing and combining data and IP to meet the COVID threat, address concerns around protecting against anti-competitive behavior, and look at how their antitrust compliance obligations may have changed. We'll discuss the dangers of accelerating too fast. And finally, using 3D printing as a case study, we'll emphasize the importance of adopting the right technology and lend our educated guesses as to what types of technology might be important in the post-COVID world. So first, a word about how we here at Baker Hostetler view digital transformation. We see it from 3 perspectives: pivot, accelerate, and exit. When you pivot, we help clients find new uses for data, IP, and technology. Some they may own and some not, in response to industry disruption or other factors, by providing strategic guidance on and structuring relations involving intellectual assets in new markets and business segments. Essentially, we help our clients stand up business lines or divisions that they hadn't previously contemplated. We help clients accelerate in unleashing the business insights, operational efficiencies, and new market opportunities that their intellectual assets have enabled by providing IP, transactional, and corporate formation guidance. And we also help clients exit when necessary by taking the learnings of their data, monetizing or liquidating those data assets. This may be M&A or other exit strategies. As you can see, digital transformation is critical in the COVID and post-COVID environment, and all businesses should be thinking about this. So who is accelerating and why? Our clients who are thriving in these times generally share 3 common characteristics. These are companies that have their IP clearly delineated, have done the things with their data to make sure that it can be operationalized, and have adopted technologies that enable agility. When we say accelerate, though, we are really talking about 2 phenomena. In addition to the companies that are capturing the moment, that were set up to rise to the COVID challenge, there are also those companies that are accelerating to get there and may not be as careful as they need to be in rushing to accelerate. So we'll discuss a bit what to watch out for so that you can accelerate correctly. So we'll start with a question for Lawrence Wu. What kinds of companies do you see that are well suited to deal with the challenges posed by COVID? What did they do right with their technology and data that helped enable success?
Thank you, Chad. Clearly, companies with a digital footprint have an advantage right now. If you're a restaurant and already have things set up to take mobile or online orders, you're way ahead. If you're a retailer and already have a big online presence, you're way ahead. But here's the thing, having a digital platform is good, but I don't think it's enough.
So what else do you need besides technology?
I think of 3 things. First, companies that can take their product and make it even more useful to customers are doing great. And I'll use an example of Zoom. You know, Zoom is now a household word. It provides video conferencing services for business, and that's what we knew it for. But it's providing an even larger function now. It's a service that people are turning to stay connected with their friends and family. So that's a new use for this technology. And second, its ability to scale. And again, Zoom is a great example, just like others like Instacart and other home delivery services. You know, on Zoom, the number of daily users jumped from 10 million to over 200 million users. That's what they had in March, 200 million users per day. And this growth happened in 3 months. Now that is a company that knows how to scale, and you can scale, you can accelerate. And the third thing I'd say is it's more than having technology. It's a strong organization, culture, and financial foundation. You know, if your company had a problem before the pandemic exposed it. If you had cash flow problems before the pandemic, it's worse now. If you worried about making payroll before the pandemic, you know, you're not going to be able to focus on expanding your capacity or adapting your service to take advantages of the opportunity that are presenting themselves now.
So you mentioned adaptability. Why is that important?
The thing about this pandemic is that it happened so suddenly and the world changed almost overnight. Companies had to adapt quickly to survive, and it's adapting to changing markets as well as market demands. So Zoom, again, you know, in early April, it was saving the world by allowing people to work remotely. A week or a couple of weeks later, Zoom bombing made companies think that they had to find another video conferencing service.
Yeah.
That Zoom made improvements to the security within a week. You know, that's adaptability and really understanding what customers need.
Okay. It's great, Lawrence. Thanks. So here we have our first CLE code, folks. Open COVID. The first CLE code is Open COVID. Please make a note of it so you get your CLE credit. So, so one of the things we had mentioned was making sure, you know, these accelerating companies can do so because they know what they own. They've made sort of strategy decisions and not only ingesting the technology, but protecting it in a right-sized fashion. So, you know, companies that have accelerated have thought through an IP strategy that coincides with practical business plans. They've allocated resources to patent strategies that balance barrier to entry benefits, defensive positions, and potential future royalty streams that come with patents with open innovation principles that leverage the power of open source and crowdsourced solutions to solve practical business problems. They've made wise decisions in knowing when to preserve some innovations as trade secrets versus seeking patent protection, and particularly when protecting valuable machine learning algorithms. They have layered and overlapped their protections, paying attention to the expanding scope of copyright protection for software programs, such as we see with Oracle's Java API litigation against Google. Some questions, Aaron, for you. Can you walk us through some of the factors you ask clients to consider when you're trying to determine whether pursuing patent protection versus preserving innovations as trade secrets?
Great, thank you, Chad. Yeah, there's a few, excuse me, when it comes to patents versus trade secrets, we generally walk through a few things on our roadmap. And one question we always ask is, the technology in question, is that something that someone could inspect and then recreate it or sort of make their own copy? And if the answer to that is yes, then patent protection is probably the best option. So for example, if you've got say a no leak valve for a travel coffee mug, not that we're doing much traveling lately, but if you don't patent that no leak valve, anyone who could take the valve apart and figure out how to make their own versions of the components and kind of make their own copies could do that. And if you haven't patented that no leak valve, that other party could do that without any legal liability. So something that could be inspected and then sort of reverse engineered or recreated, that's something that's pretty well sort of suited for patent protection. On the other hand, if you have an innovation that's difficult or perhaps even impossible to reverse engineer, that's something that may be better suited as a trade secret. So one example of this, I suppose, is the process for making Thomas's English muffins. Just because you can read the package and you know the ingredients, that doesn't mean that you know how to mix them and bake them to get that sort of signature texture that we're all accustomed to in Thomas's muffins. So again, something that's impossible to reverse engineer, probably better suited for trade secrets. Other considerations besides sort of the character of the technology itself is of course cost. Patents are legal documents. They require a patent attorney to work with the inventors to draft the document and then to sort of negotiate and get things through the patent office. There's a cost with this. It's often worthwhile, but in general, patents can, they can be costly, and that's part of the calculus. Trade secrets, on the other hand, really come at no cost. They do come with an effort, and the effort that's needed is that you must keep your trade secret secret. It's got to be kept in a safe, like the Coke formula, kept in a secure online environment. Some measures have to be taken to secure that technology. Another consideration is that of duration. And the question is, do you think you might need 10, 15, or 20 years of protection? Things like pharmaceuticals that are very valuable. Every day of patent protection for pharmaceutical can be worth a lot of money. If that's the case, consider a patent if you think you may need protection for a fairly long time. On the other hand, if your product will be outmoded in only a few years, probably a patent and the cost is not quite the right fit. And other forms of protection might be better. So making this choice, again, we consider whether the technology could be replicated, what's the cost of protection, and there's also an intangible value, I suppose, of a patent, particularly for a company seeking to raise capital, startups, and the like. A patent's sort of a symbol of value. And in some instances, after your company's given some thought to its mix of IP assets, maybe a mix is best. A mix between patents and trade secrets is the choice that optimizes your overall balance.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So we're going to talk a bit later about the importance of 3D printing in the COVID era in a little more detail. But can you walk us through some of the protections for 3D printing designs and considerations when a company either uses a 3DP design or decides to share a 3DP design that they created?
Thanks, Chad. Yes, 3D printing, I know we saw a few slides ago that mentioned technologies that enable agility, and I think we've seen that 3D printing as sort of the leading example of this. There's a few flavors, I guess you could call them a protection for 3D printing designs and also 3D printed products, and there are some considerations that come to play when it comes to the use of these designs and also sharing them. For 3D printing design files, which are basically the sort of instruction files that's fed to the 3D printer, that protection could be in the form of copyright, which we talked about a few moments ago. That copyright would cover, generally the text and sort of the images, perhaps in that electronic design file. For the physical product that's printed, whether it's a valve or something else, that protection could be in the form of a utility patent, could also be in the form of a design patent, and these are generally used to protect the product's configuration or even the product's appearance. Now, in terms of sort of use or sharing of 3D printing design files or 3D printing products, a company that's seeking to share a 3D printed innovation with the public can, of course, sell or license that innovation. And one thing that we've seen is, in particular with licenses, those can be limited to a field of use. So, for example, a license that allows the product or the design file to be used for purposes of, say, the automotive market, but not also for the aerospace market. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of interest in sort of licensing sort of processes around COVID-19. And at present, there's a number of leading companies and sort of top-level institutions that have kind of joined in what's called the Open COVID Pledge. And under that pledge, these companies and institutions have offered certain, not all, but some of their patented and also copyrighted innovations to the public free of charge for use in the battle against COVID-19. But there are certain limitations on this Open COVID Pledge. For example, there's a field of use. There's also a set duration after which the license will expire. And for these reasons, anyone who uses a technology that's covered by the Open COVID Pledge should take care to understand the specifics of that license.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's similar issues on the copyright side of things, Aaron, with, Creative Commons has supported Open COVID Pledge, and Creative Commons licenses are wonderful because they're a known quantity, they're easy to adopt, and everybody knows what they are. But there's things you need to think through, right? That they're irrevocable. That although they're not sub-licensable, you can't revoke the ability of a licensee to share. There's a sharing right within the Creative Commons license, and that can't be revoked. So even though it's not technically sub-licensable, once somebody's been granted that license, they can share it into perpetuity. So you really need to think about, okay, we need to rise to this COVID moment. These are used a lot for data sets, sort of sharing treatment and test kits data and information. But what happens, when COVID dies down a bit, right? I won't say is cured, but when we have some sort of control over it, what happens next? And the open COVID patent licenses are great; they are limited in duration, but the Creative Commons licenses aren't. So you really need to think through your business plans, your next step. How are you integrating open innovation in your proprietary concerns and footprint? So thanks, Aaron. Thanks for that. So we're going to talk about something that I see a lot, that I deal with a lot. And one of the impetuses for me in helping to launch Baker Hostetler's digital transformation and data economy practice team as a team was that I kept getting requests for consultations from companies that contracted for software development services around what they termed to be a platform. Now, what's become clear to me is that there is many different definitions of the term platform as there are companies launching one. It's a bit like Humpty Dumpty in Alice in Wonderland. What does the word mean? It means whatever my client tells me it means. Okay. Used to have sort of a clear definition, but now not so much. And there's just as many notions of fairness and IP ownership in various aspects of these platforms, as there are definitions. And this is what I've come to refer to and call the platform problem. So what typically happens is these companies have accelerated quickly. They've built multi-component software solution that combines some sort of unique data porting techniques. Maybe they've optimized Hadoop in a certain way, or they've figured out how to take unstructured data in a data lake and structure it and package it. They'll be able to transport across multiple different types of software. They feed that into some sort of rules-based decision engines. Maybe it's machine learning, some kind of AI component, that provides analytic or information management results. And then that gets pushed to a portal, some sort of user interface, and that helps drive larger business, better business results. Now, this pattern is the same, regardless of whether we're talking about mortgages, or energy allocation or insurance risk management, healthcare consultation, myriad of other business use cases. That same pattern, like, oh, I own a platform, I pulled together these multiple different components, and this is a platform, and I own it, and the vendor doesn't. There's always a combination of a strong belief by the customer, oftentimes our client, although we do the vendor side as well, but the customer that they own all or part of the platform. You combine that with a complete lack of contract provisions that support that belief, and then a faith that the customer and the vendor are buddies, that they all get along, that there's a common understanding of what's fair and who owns what, and they'll be able to work it out regardless of what the contract actually says. Now, sometimes that understanding falls apart when the hard work of actually allocating the IP, picking which modules are owned by who, which bits of source code should be owned by the customer versus the vendor, who needs to repurpose this, who gets the benefit of certain functionality or code. Sometimes that understanding, begins to fall apart when you shine a light on it. So about 30% of my work these days is in auditing clients' IP and software programs, helping clients think through what aspects are important for them to own versus ownership by the vendor, right? Not grabbing everything, but trying to be fair about it, come to some notion of yes, and either renegotiating or amending agreements or otherwise resolving disputes, sometimes through litigation. The platform problem is one of the drivers of digital transformation, and one risk that it's facing accelerating companies that I think they need to think through. So let's talk a bit about data. Information wants to be free, right? Much of what has allowed digitally transformed companies to thrive in these times is the business insights enabled by big data analytics. When you ask a data scientist, how much data do you need? The answer is often more, right? So housing and collecting massive amounts of enterprise data is crucial, but so is getting access to data generated by third parties, perhaps at times even data available from your competitors. Data pooling for use in developing testing kits and vaccines has seen an uptick as enabled by initiatives like Open COVID Pledge, but these things come with risks as well as rewards. So a couple of questions for you, Ann. When a company is considering accelerating or pivoting, how will a company's data be relevant for antitrust purposes? What questions should they be asking about data to get information needed for antitrust purposes if they are accelerating or pivoting?
Yes, Chad. Well, I think the answer is a resounding yes, said by the antitrust lawyer. And I recently was on a call with one of our San Francisco partners who just commented, I never saw COVID leading to so many antitrust issues, but there's so many, and I'm glad you're here on the team. And so I'm glad to be on the team and to have the team that's looking at this kind of across issues, because there are a lot of antitrust issues arising, as we've been discussing, and Lawrence did a great job explaining. What we see as many of us continue to live life in lockdown is that companies can accelerate in an online environment, often because they're able to serve customers directly while those customers remain in their homes, and they tend to amass a lot of data doing so. And definitionally, just like you said, Chad, I mean, in the antitrust world, I feel like every conference we're talking about big data and data. What does big data mean? What I find interesting is, we can think of big online platforms or social media outlets. We can talk about big data from that perspective. But the really interesting issues to me that I see is that it can also mean companies that may suddenly have pivoted or grown a line of business or a way of functioning in COVID that makes them data rich all of a sudden. And now what are they going to do with that data? Or do they need more data to survive in the new world they live in? And companies are doing this, and they're adapting and accelerating. And I think companies, what I've seen is they're very good at taking a look in the mirror. Companies have mission statements, but taking a good look forward through the looking glass as they accelerate is very important. What are they going to do with that data, just so they don't accelerate into a brick wall, as we've talked about? So I can speak to helping companies accelerating, helping them not to accelerate into an antitrust brick wall. So I don't know how, just a brief overview of where the touch points are with antitrust enforcement and antitrust issues. I mean, there's basically 3 touch points. There's the merger context, when you're being bought or sold. And that can also mean not just a whole buying or selling of a company, you buy or you sell. It can mean acquiring some asset you need to continue to move forward and accelerate, or joint ventures, for instance, that could rise to thresholds that need to be reviewed by antitrust agencies, the DOJ or the FTC. And maybe around the world, globally. And then there's this whole category of conduct issues, as we call them in the antitrust world, either unilateral conduct issues that we see a lot of focus on data, either in the US we call them monopolization. In Europe, they tend to call them abuse of dominance, which I think is interesting because big is not necessarily bad. Big can be very good. The abuse part in the European phrase, it's the abuse of that market power and what you do with it. And we see data, I'll try to give some examples, coming into those issues. Then we have the collaborations piece of antitrust, which is another type of conduct, which can be both civil or criminal. And that is coming up, those issues are coming up a lot in COVID because companies are working together in all new ways, trying to get through this, trying to keep pushing forward and accelerating and solving, really the world's biggest problems, whether it be vaccines or getting product to market or 3D printing things that have never been 3D printed before. So when companies are accelerating quickly, you know, they can find themselves doing business very differently. And I think it's important for antitrust purposes to think about what data they have and how they compete. Who are they competing with? And what relevant markets do they operate in? That's always the beginning of an antitrust merger or monopolization assessment, is what is their market? And, you know, what does their data mean? If they might be operating at multiple levels, and company may see themselves as one thing, but they have data that makes them something else. And what do they do with that data? And it's complicated, and the antitrust agencies are trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
But you know, if you're operating in an adjacent market, we see this a lot in ad tech, for instance, you know, what are you doing with the data that you have? I mean, there's a lot of issues here and tension between privacy issues as well. If you decide to block the sharing of certain user data, are you protecting privacy interests or hurting rivals? This is a very interesting case involving Facebook and the Pinkini app, where they cut off data to people searching other people's friends, you know, wearing bikinis. I mean, a lot of people would think that's a great thing, but then you have, you know, that you can't search your friends' beach photos. On the other hand, that, you know, there's a lawsuit over that now because there's concerns about cutting off that data. And so those, you know, issues become present for everyone when they are looked at through an antitrust lens. I think, you know, our company is accelerating to be a monopolist. I always say, as an antitrust prosecutor prosecuting price fixers, I didn't necessarily see inadvertent price fixers. But I think it's very interesting that the acquisition of data might make you an inadvertent monopolist, particularly now as we're seeing every day companies exiting the market because they can't keep up. So, you know, we've talked to some clients that all of a sudden are the only ones doing what they do or providing the service that they do because everyone else shut down and hasn't reopened and can't reopen. And so there's, you know, some of these kind of niche areas that a company can find themselves to be the dominant player. And then what are they doing with that data? Because they're going to be viewed differently if they are believed or alleged to have monopoly power. And they need to really be thinking about all of those things.
So what about the collaboration context, right? You know, whether, you know, apart from market power, what should they be thinking about? You know, what if they want to join forces with another company in open COVID pledge or something else? And what happens when they house their competitors' data? You know, when you know, competitors are sharing data and housing data belonging to somebody else as part of that collaboration, what factors should they be ticking off?
Yeah, and there's a lot of need for collaboration among competitors, and the antitrust agencies for years have, you know, there's been competitor collaboration guidelines out since 2000, and, you know, they were reminding people of those. Now, more need than ever during this pandemic to collaborate, to address challenges, and antitrust law, I think, wants to promote that. I will say, you know, it's 20 years in antitrust enforcer. When I hear about the open COVID pledge, which sounds great on many levels, you know, I have to think about that. When you see who signed up for that pledge, I've checked that website back multiple times. I mean, there are a number of horizontal competitors on that list taking the pledge. And, you know, a lot of questions come to mind, like, what are they talking about? There's certainly a lot they can talk about and a lot they can move things forward, a lot they can share. But things like pricing and output decisions really need to be made independently, or you run the risk of running afoul of antitrust laws, potentially even criminal ones, if horizontal agreements that relate to price are reached in those contexts. And we do see crisis cartels forming after past crisis, where desperate times call for desperate measures and people may be coming together for a laudable goal, but lines are crossed. And I think that becomes a compliance issue. There is some really good news, I think. I feel like I've been a little bit of an Ann Downer on some of these points, but there's some good news on the collaborations front coming from the antitrust agencies. And there's a lot of material to look at if you're thinking through these complex collaboration issues. Like, is it okay antitrust-wise to collaborate with a competitor and I need to do it today, or, you know, miss this opportunity or miss the opportunity to address a real need? So on March 24th, the DOJ and the FTC released guidelines for cooperation among competitors in the COVID context. That was really quick. I mean, for the agencies to get together and do that in this crisis, and as having worked in that often, I'm really proud that they did that, because it really reiterates this commitment to respond quickly to these moments we're talking about. And really the agencies, they not only provided guidance talking about some behavior that's unlikely to be problematic. That's a little, usually enforcers like to tell you after, what the problematic thing is, but they're trying to look forward and say, this is unlikely to be problematic, regular old efficiency enhancing economic activity. That's just the collaboration guidelines. But sharing technical know-how, they said, rather than company-specific data about prices or wages or output, that's usually going to be okay. Practice parameters, strictly like talked about in the healthcare sector, and joint purchasing arrangements among healthcare providers, they said, don't raise concerns. And then they did something else, which I think is really a good testament to the commitment of the agencies to understand the moments and the business needs companies are facing in this crisis. They said, if you have a collaboration and you're concerned about the antitrust implications, a collaboration you're considering, then we will provide this expedited business review, and the FTC has a corollary program to review that conduct within 7 days. And that is lightning speed for the government. I worked in an office that reviewed those, and for many years it would take months, and it's not unreasonable. They would do an investigation of that potential collaboration, but they're doing them in a week. And so far they've done 3 of them. 2 of them involve PPE, companies that wanted to come together to collaborate in different ways to bring PPE to the market. Very important. And within 7 days, the division cleared that and explained why they don't have a present intention to prosecute, or that they designate there's not antitrust concerns. So very, very interesting issues, and I think that's important for companies to think about that option if there are these concerns.
Thanks, Ann. Super helpful. Lawrence, Ann was talking a bit about sort of the data monolith, right? A company that is almost gained market power because they've got access to such a rich cache of data. Can too much data be a source of market power?
Chad, they say that data is the new oil, but here's how I think about it as an economist. At the end of the day, we want consumers to be better off. That's what competition yields, more output, lower prices, more innovation. And that's what economies of scale and more data can yield, more output and lower prices. But companies can and do use customer data to be more efficient and to provide customers with better information and service. And that's a good thing.
It's great, Lawrence. Thanks. And what do you see as some of the challenges facing companies from joint development or other collaborations? What are some of the, from an economist perspective?
In general, joint ventures are challenging to start with, and many don't succeed. From an economic point of view, the first thing I think about is what is the rationale for the venture in the first place, and what does each party contribute to the venture? So, for example, consider the Nike plus iPod Sport Kit. Like that's there's a shoe sensor. It fits into slips into the shoe. The sensor sends data to your iPod or iPhone. Like this is a joint venture between Apple and Nike that involves patents and trademark sharing. Look, the rationale is clear. Is Apple going to start making shoes? No. Is Nike going to start making phones? No. But they can create something great together. But you have to start with that vision, and each party has to know what they're contributing.
Okay. And can you tell us a bit about, sort of carving up IP in mutually successful ways? When they collaborate in this fashion and need to assign IP one place to the other, what should they be thinking about?
Well, it's challenging, especially if you have a joint venture or collaboration among competitors, because you do need rivals to cooperate. And there's always a fear that you're helping your competitors to succeed or sharing your IP. So those are big challenges.
Okay. And then how about antitrust issues from these collaborations? What kind of challenges they pose from an economist perspective?
Right. So, Ann mentioned a couple of these basic concepts. There's always concerns about collusion, especially if a joint venture allows for information exchanges, or that is exchange of information that should not be shared. There's always concern about reducing the rivalry between the parents of the joint venture. So that's really a concern about potential competition. So for example, suppose two firms create a joint venture to open up a new market. Is that going to reduce the incentive of each parent to enter that new market on its own? If they would not have entered in the first place, then the joint venture would be pro-competitive. So that's what I would look at. And then lastly, I'd say concern about any competitive foreclosure. You know, the venture may say that it's only going to do business with its parents. So it might foreclose the parents' rivals from getting access to the joint venture's services. So that's another basic theory of harm that can come out of these ventures.
Thanks, Lawrence. So we're going to change topics a bit here, and we're going to talk about picking the right technology. You know, not all technologies are created equal. We are seeing an uptick in company valuations for those companies that identify themselves as AI. I was on a panel last week with another organization, and the joke was if you add .ai to your company name, you increase your valuation by 30%. That used to be the way with blockchain, right? 2-3 years ago, blockchain, if you called yourself a blockchain company, your valuation shot through the roof. Maybe not so much anymore. So companies that have laid bets on technologies that enable agility, that let them pivot, and if necessary, pivot back, have an advantage. So Aaron, you've been thinking and writing on this. Tell us some ways that 3D printing is coming into its own in this age of COVID. I think you're on mute, Aaron.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Chad. I think that's right. I think 3D printing has really, kind of gotten a lot of press, deservedly so recently, because of its ability to sort of adapt and pivot quickly to make products that are needed and pivot away from things that are maybe less, less of a high priority. So I think one, great example of this that we've seen in recently is the way that leading research institutions have sort of repurposed their own 3D printing capabilities, sometimes in the matter of only a few hours, to support efforts against COVID-19. So kind of more specifically, these institutions, a lot of institutions will have 3D printers in their research labs, and this can be at the university level, even at the high school level. And these institutions that have 3D printing systems in the research labs weren't using them. The labs have been closed, of course, because of COVID-related lockdowns. And so you've got all these 3D printers just kind of sitting there idle, not really doing anything. And the institutions realized very quickly that even though these 3D printing assets, the printers and other systems, were not printing parts for use in research, those 3D printing assets could be used to print things like face masks and filters and other medical equipment that were urgently needed by medical professionals. I think we all saw in the news, certainly shortages of masks, face shields, and those sorts of things. And in this way, universities could very quickly print face masks and other things that were quite literally taken right off the press, right off the printer, and taken across the street to a hospital or other care facility that needed those masks. And again, this is something that could be done in the matter of only a few hours. And again, this sort of quick pivot to sort of repurposing of 3D printing assets really shows the value of 3D printing capabilities. I think these capabilities were appreciated somewhat, I think, before kind of the COVID-19 experience that we're all having, but it's really pointed up the ability of these assets to pivot quickly to make things that are needed. As another example, a company in Italy was able to 3D print valves, sort of disposable valves for use in hospital ventilators when there was a shortage of those valves. And thanks to that company, the hospital was able to put patients on ventilators when without those 3D printed valves, the ventilators would not have been usable or operable. And again, I think this is a pretty dramatic illustration of the value of 3D printing, and shows the way that 3D printing can not only pivot quickly from one product to another, but also shows how 3D printing can sort of liberate its users from traditional supply chains. Without 3D printing, that hospital would have had to wait for valves to be assembled and then shipped by its usual supplier, and that supplier could have been at the mercy of its own supply chain. So it's, in some sense, it's kind of the equivalent if you're a restaurant and you're making salad. Do you want to depend on suppliers to bring your vegetables to you, or do you want to have a garden in your backyard? In some sense, that's what we're seeing with 3D printing.
And disrupting supply chains in the midst of it, yeah. So Lawrence, what have you seen in the marketplace in terms of technologies that are useful in COVID?
There's no question that COVID will accelerate the growth and adoption of digital technology. Like, we've long been able to shop online. COVID just made us do a lot more of it. We've had contactless payments in the form of credit cards or e-wallets for a long time. COVID just made us use more of it. Zoom and VPN and other technologies, they've been around for a long time. Now we use it every day. Schools are using it for distance learning. Doctors are doing it to do patient consults by video. And Aaron's example is a great one. We've had the 3D printing technology for a while now, but now companies have found a new use that's going to mitigate problems in the supply chain. But I have to say, Chad, there's definitely a tech story, but I don't think it's entirely a tech story. Just as important is one, how quickly customers and consumers have adopted these existing technologies for new uses. And the second thing is how consumer behavior is going to change as a result of the pandemic. I think both of those things all made that technology very useful.
Yeah. Is COVID spurring innovation? I mean, is COVID being a catalyst for new inventions, new innovation?
I think so. And it's not just a new technology, but how that technology is used. I think the pandemic basically kicked open the door of opportunities and markets for all these existing technologies. Again, Aaron's example is a great one, and I think that itself will create strong incentives for further innovation.
And Chad, just jumping in on that,
yeah.
I would say that telehealth, which is not something we've talked about so far, but when I worked at the antitrust division for many years, there was competition advocacy letters written regarding telehealth that I'm very proud of the work done there. What a catalyst. I mean, I've done 2 telehealth visits to the pediatrician with my children, just well visits. It was, went very well. I was totally open to it, just didn't have the need to do it before. That has pushed through, I think, in an interesting way, in a regulatory framework too, where there had been resistance before to some of that. It's happening now right away. Yep. So that people can do that. And I think that's exactly what Lawrence is talking about. And we're going to see that happen in other areas. And then there's attendant legal issues to all of those quick new markets emerging and new services provided.
I think you're right, and that happens to be an excellent segue into what we're going to talk about, which is what comes next. In our first panel, Allison Blair told us that a company's best digital transformation consultant is COVID-19. So, telehealth is a perfect example. I attended a seminar by a prominent software data company yesterday, and there was an ER doc from LA, and he talked about why haven't we been using telehealth more? It's just so much more efficient when you're dealing with 80% of the issues that practitioners have to deal with. There's so much less downtime, waiting rooms, all the complaints that go with visiting a doctor's office, never mind exposing people to other sick people. Telehealth has always made sense. So the post-COVID world usher in an era of increased reliance on these contactless technologies, video conferencing, home deliveries, or is it going to go the other way, right? Are we all dying to go back to the first concert we can and dive into the first mosh pit that erupts at the concert? It'd be my personal preference. We're all sort of dying for this human contact again. So question for Lawrence, what do you think will be the important technologies and business models for a post-COVID world?
Well, digital will be important in the post-COVID world, but I'm glad you mentioned business models because, look, it might be old-fashioned to talk about good management and adaptable and flexible business models, but I think it's really important. And ultimately, I think that's going to separate winners from losers. So I guess I'll think about that in 3 ways. first, the pandemic is changing consumer behavior, and companies that can adapt and respond to these changes will win. For example, I think schools and universities are going to have to rethink how they provide education. The pandemic forced them to do that.
Yep.
And the schools and universities that can do that will really win. The second thing is that the pandemic totally disrupted the supply chain. Companies that have flexible supply chains and companies that can get around bottlenecks in their supply chains are going to succeed. And third, I think companies that can move quickly and gain insight more quickly will do well. For example, Cushman & Wakefield, a global real estate company, they knew about the crisis pretty early because they have real estate across the world. In January, their Asian executives were telling management in the US that COVID was coming and it was serious. And I listened to a podcast of the CEO who said he immediately sensed danger and fear of death and he took action. Like that gave Cushman weeks in
Yep.
advance to make changes that they need to make. But so that's old fashioned. That's good old fashioned high tech brain power, and I still believe in that.
Yeah. So Ann, what kind of lasting impression are we going to have here? I mean, are people scarred and never going to want to be near each other ever again? Things like planes or restaurants. What kind of new antitrust compliance issues are they going to face in this post-COVID world? And we might have lost Ann. I'll tell you what, we'll come back.
And I really.
Oh, you're back. Go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay.
Yeah, we lost you for a minute.
I will say that Lawrence and I really geeked it up in preparing on this point, because as people who, as an antitrust lawyer and an economist that spend our lives looking at markets, supply chains, free markets, this is just fascinating to us. I think how companies are adapting, how people are adapting, and how this will look going forward. And just on a personal human perspective, there's just a lot of interesting questions about what life will look like as the stay-at-home orders begin to lift. Companies and people can do more things, but how will that look? We've gotten used to how will restaurants look? How will, hair and nail salons look? How will seating in airlines look? We've gotten used to being packed in, and I've been really used to being packed in really tight, more and more tight the last 2 decades. The seats got smaller on airplanes. Every tourist spot I went to seemed more crowded. When I go to a restaurant, you can hear the people right next to you and their whole conversation, and we just got used to that. But are we going to want to do that given the social distancing concerns before we have a vaccine? So, what are people going to be comfortable with? And some of the things we're talking about with distancing, I think to me it screams of reduced capacity. And how are companies and businesses, even small businesses, going to react to that? And what does it mean for the market? And people are working just so hard to get services and things to you, and companies to stay afloat. And, and all these things, it seems like people have, their own little personal stories. But, in my own wonderful little neighborhood here just outside DC, I saw a local restaurant and a local small market using these little robots to deliver groceries and, orders to stay in business because people weren't going in. And these little robots are so cool to watch. Connecticut Avenue, a super busy street in, DC here, watching these robots cross it, and they're doing it. They're making the tech work. But that local restaurant and that local market, where I used to come in and they'd say, oh, there's the O'Brien kid's mom, and I'd wave as I came in and I'd pay in cash, but that wasn't tracked anywhere. Now, we're using digital payment. They put into the robot, my address. They're tracking now every, what I tend to buy on a Friday, and those aren't small businesses that did that before. And that's just a little vignette example of the many thousands of places this is happening at all scales all around the world. So, what are they going to do with that data? Are these businesses going to keep doing things that they've done during COVID after? I think a lot of them, yes. People love these robots, and having the kids think it's cool, and stuff gets to you and you don't have to deal with a person. So if they continue to do that, how does that change their business? And I think the data piece we talked about before, and to me, advising companies on compliance. And compliance in the antitrust world is really important, because compliance means preventing antitrust risk from happening or addressing it quickly if it does. And you have a lot more, and different risks than a lot of businesses had. And I think they need to think hard, about what their new and continuing risks will be, and try to, while it's difficult, while austerity measures are in place to spend money, think about things like compliance going forward. Because who are you going to be in the future as a company, and what services do you provide? I mean, the good news is that's what a lot of us do, and we provide that advice. And there are so many kind of guardrails that can be put in place to ensure, that you don't have problems going forward. But it's the reality of this dynamic and changing world that we're living in.
Thanks, Ann. And Aaron, what are the IP plays that clients need to be making now? What should they be putting into place for what comes out, the other side of this moment, of this era?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. These are good questions and good points. I think, certainly in terms of protecting IP, as we look at the COVID world and hopefully the post, as things will evolve in the post-COVID world, I think one thing that's going to become important is of course, as we heard over and over today, and we'll keep hearing, is supply chain. I think companies have kind of, as we all have, sort of taken certain things for granted, and sort of the ability to make whatever we wanted, assuming we could devise it. And I think that's not so much as a given anymore. So I think things like 3D printing or ways to sort of mitigate your own supply chain risk may now become part of the IP. Kind of the IP calculus. Just because you've invented it doesn't mean that you can necessarily make it in a reliable, sort of consistent way. So I think there's going to be some thinking about, again, supply chains as companies continue to innovate. That's going to be one of the check boxes. Certainly 3D printing and things that give you the ability to pivot back and forth between what seem like unrelated products. The ability to make toys at 9 in the morning and ventilator valves at noon. That's a reality now, and I think for companies that are sort of going to embrace that, they'll do well to do so. And I think to think about in terms of licensing, sort of access to IP, field of use licenses, I think will become important if you're a sort of a platform company that, for example, that deals with say robot delivery vehicles, as Ann spoke of. What's your field of use? How are you going to sort of parcel out and make that IP accessible? And I think also as Ann said, we may be spending more time at home or near to home with a emphasis on social distancing and disinfection. So I think companies would do well to consider how they might apply their expertise to that. I had just read something about a high-end beverage company that was not selling much alcohol to bars and restaurants. They repurposed their facilities to make medical grade sanitizer, and that really leveraged the company's expertise into sort of a market that they probably hadn't considered before. So again, I think these things all sort of tie together and point up the the consideration of how strong is your supply chain and what's your ability to pivot and adapt your product line, because you may be making something in a couple months that you never made before.
Great points, Aaron. Thanks. So it's been fun sort of trying to think through what comes next and be prepared for it and war game all this out. And I know the collective experience of all of us, we've seen a lot of different permutations, and it's a part of our job I think we all kind of enjoy, right, is helping our clients prepare, think creatively and not just sort of reactively to things. So Ann, we have a question for you from the audience here. Do you foresee an uptick? I know there's already been an uptick, but do you see even more of an uptick in price gouging lawsuits or prosecutions in the coming months, or years to come?
Well, I have 2 other webinars this week on that very topic. So a very timely, in fact, I held myself back from mentioning price gouging at the top of my piece. It's the #1 thing I'm spending time on now. And as an antitrust lawyer, I find that ironic in a lot of ways, because in my 2 decades at DOJ, certainly it was more when gas prices and things like that went up after hurricanes. But yes, it's every day. It's around the world. My webinar yesterday was with Brazil. And there are lots of issues, and it's a complex web of state and now for the first time federal enforcement. So yes, lots of issues there.
Thanks, Ann. So thank you to our panelists for joining. Thank you all for listening to us and trying to wrap our heads and our arms around about what's going on in this new era, this new world, how we succeed in this new era. The last CLE code is Accelerate. I hope you'll join us next Wednesday at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. My colleague, Juan Serrato, is going to moderate a panel on how to navigate your exit, restructuring options, reorg strategies, and when to file for bankruptcy. We're going to talk to some companies that are getting out of some business lines and jumping wholeheartedly into new digital transformation business lines. I think it'll be a really, really interesting discussion. I hope you can join us. We will be sending out the email of the video of this webinar. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact any of us. You'll get a PDF copy of this presentation. Our email addresses will be on the second page there. And thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us. And we'll hope to see you all again soon.